Now, a special presentation from 12 News.
Our complete coverage of Southern New England's housing crisis continues tonight. Good evening, I'm Mike Montecalvo.
And I'm Shannon Hegy. Welcome to our special town hall.
This really is a topic that impacts nearly everyone in some way. Take a listen.
And they're still upping the rent. Like, how do you expect people to live?
I'm not trying to be homeless. Honestly, I just want my apartment fixed.
Over the next half hour, our panel of experts will address some of the biggest issues facing people, whether you're looking for a home, renting, or doing construction.
They'll also be answering your questions on everything from rent control to how to find affordable housing. So let's meet them. We're joined by Chris Whitten, the president and elect of the Rhode Island Association of Realtors, Jennifer Hawkins, president and CEO of One Neighborhood Builders.
Bob Baldwin, president of RB Homes Incorporated and former head of the Rhode Island Builders Association. Also joining us tonight is Courtney Nicolato, president and CEO of United Way of Rhode Island. Both Jennifer and Courtney are members of the Housing Affordability Commission.
All right, so let's dive right in. Southern New England is in the middle of a housing crisis. On Monday, Ted Nesi talked about how we got here, saying the supply of houses and apartments in Rhode Island has just not kept up with demand, which is driving up prices. So, Courtney, tell us a little bit about the help that's available for people right now and what you're personally seeing at the United Way from people who are really stuck in this situation.
You know, the United Way runs the 211 call center as well as the Senior and Disabilities Resource Network. And so each year we hear from about 188,000 Rhode Islanders. So 1 in 5 Rhode Islanders are calling us. And the majority of the calls, the highest call volume we get is for housing. Wow. Right behind that is food. We know quite clearly that the issues that face Rhode Islanders when someone has a food problem, oftentimes it's because they're facing eviction or they're seeing wage challenges. The cost of living has gone up dramatically. Wages have remained relatively flat, and more people are finding themselves either on the brink of homelessness or homeless than ever before. Many of the stories that we hear from Rhode Islanders are folks who are working, have multiple jobs, are single parents, and are finding themselves sleeping in their cars for the first time ever. And that's so infuriating in so many ways, and because these Rhode Islanders work so hard for our communities. But the unfortunate reality is many of the resources that they had during the COVID pandemic have gone away, and many nonprofit organizations can't keep up with the demand because it is well surpassed pre-pandemic levels. And so we have every tool in our toolbox that we're working hard through our 211 call center that's available 24/7, 365 and in 200 different languages. But the fact remains is that the supply is just not there.
Wow.
And Chris, you being a realtor, you know all this, you hear about interest rates, but it's really an inventory problem. Someone trying to sell their home and then go buy another one.
It's so true, and I appreciate you bringing this to light. It really is a crisis, and for those of us at the front lines, we've known this for a while now. So I'm glad that we're getting the word out. And yeah, the problem, the crisis, if that we're calling, it was disguised by the interest rate for a while, and that slowed down some buyers, but the lack of inventory started from the Great Recession, right? 07, 08, and Bob, you know this well. Yes. That building, the new construction builds just lagged from there and never caught up. We've never been able to catch up. So now we're at this pent-up situation where there's just, it really is a crisis on our hands.
Yeah, some people maybe consider building a home instead of renting or buying. In Rhode Island, the median single-family home cost only $135,000 back in the year 2000. Prices climbed over the next few years, and in the wake of the pandemic, prices have, as you all know, exploded. The median home in Rhode Island now costs $430,000. So, Bob, with costs overrunning, material prices skyrocketing, do people even have the money to build right now?
They do have some monies because incomes haven't gone down. We haven't seen deflation in incomes from people being laid off. The economy is still strong. The problem gets back to the cost of construction and the lack of buildable lots or places to put the housing. That's the biggest problem we're faced right now. We builders like to build. I'm a third-generation home builder. We'd love to build houses. The problem we have fundamentally is twofold. One, as you mentioned, Shannon, and I want to thank you all again to follow what Chris said for bringing this to everybody's attention. This is a serious discussion. I wish we'd had this discussion 25 years ago. We maybe wouldn't have it this bad right now, but we are here now, and thank you very much for that. So since COVID, the cost of constructions have gone up 50%. That's the reality that we have to live in the construction industry right now. Whether it's concrete, sheathing, gypsum, roofing, plywood, it doesn't matter. Cost of construction's gone up 50%. The problem on top of that is the lack of land. Buildable lots right now could go anywhere from $140,000 to $225,000 for the piece of dirt to build your house.
Right.
Okay, if you have something at $150,000 for the piece of land, historically, 25% of the cost of the house is the land. That means that house is going to come in at, using that formula, which the appraisers and the underwriters use, that house is going to come in at $600,000. If it's $200,000 for the cost of the land, that's an $800,000 house. Neither one of those are a middle-class house.
Right.
You need to get the cost of the land down to $75,000, $80,000 to try to hit the median income in Rhode Island to get that house below $400,000. And the supply is just not there. All the things we've talked about this week, the restrictions, the zoning, the lack of approvals, all the costs, the delays, the lawsuits, have got us to where we are here today.
Well, Jennifer, talk about building for a second. In your opinion, how come multifamily homes are not being built like they were back in the 70s and 80s?
You know, really to sort of piggyback on what Bob had to say, I mean, really is fundamentally a supply and demand challenge. Right. You know, as a nonprofit housing developer, we're pretty much in the same boat here as Bob. You know, we are trying to be able to increase multifamily rental. There's a huge demand for multifamily rental, affordable housing. And you know, we just are not able to purchase the land at a price point that makes that possible. I think you know the permitting issue is also tremendously difficult. In order to build at scale, at density, you need to be able to work in municipalities that are amenable to allowing scale. We're really excited about a development that actually we're doing here in East Providence. It'll be 144 units of multifamily apartments in 3 buildings along Taunton Avenue. It's a thoroughfare, it's right on a bus line, it's a transit-oriented development. But those parcels are really sort of hard to come by, and then working in municipalities that are, they understand that we need scale to make a project work is harder and harder to come by.
Let's turn from building to actual home prices. On Wednesday, we revealed that it's now unaffordable to buy a home anywhere in Rhode Island. And Courtney, back to you. What is your message to the people in these towns and cities currently pushing back? Because you had told me that's one of the biggest things you're all up against, is that towns don't want more houses built. They're worried about too many kids in their schools. They're worried about deforestation. What do you say to those people out there?
You know, and it's not every city and town, but there is a lot of folks that are saying not in my backyard, right? Yeah. So NIMBYism is probably the acronym that we often talk about.
Yes.
And there's lots of reasons as to why folks are saying not in my backyard. And we've done a lot of research to show that many of those are actually myths, right? And one of them is around the cost of education. Right? When housing development is built, property taxes then come into the community. And in Massachusetts, they heard the same thing when they were going through their crisis, and they still are, but when they were kind of looking at tackling it. And they put a legislation in place that said, hey, if your city or town have education costs that come up when you're building, we'll incentivize you to build. And then if there are additional costs that can't be offset by property taxes, we have a fund that will pay the difference. And that was, decade plus ago,
right.
Has never been used once. And so we brought the same thing here in as well. You know, many folks are thinking that affordable housing is just for a certain class of people, and that's so dramatically incorrect. Affordable housing is older adults. My mom, my dad, our family members, right? These are our up and coming youth that want to purchase their very first home and live that American dream. It is many of the folks that you had in many of the stories this week. These are our nurses, and there are teachers, and these are the folks who are looking and seeking and want to make Rhode Island a place to live and to call home, and they can't.
I just want to dovetail with what Courtney just said. Sure. The NIMBYs don't understand that these entry-level people are the people that your kids grew up with, that are starting their careers. They're the teacher's assistant. They're the rookie police officer. They're the CNA, there's the clerk at Macy's. These are people that want to get into the housing market. These are really hard-working, solid middle-class people. then they just need a break to get into the market. It's not what the NIMBYs think it is. It's not going to be, the ghetto people in I've actually had neighbors complain about a project, and I've heard this from friends of mine. They think the neighborhood's going to be all trash and people litter. No, these are solid middle class people that need a break to get into the housing market.
And we can't build our economy. There's no way. We can't grow jobs. We can't build business without these homes. And so we have to be creative. And we have to look at existing properties, maybe abandoned buildings. We have to look, and I'm really excited because there is a lot more flexibility around zoning regulations thanks to many of Speaker Circacci and the House and the General Assembly's decisions last year of kind of adding some incentives and some opportunities to bust these myths. But being educated on what these issues really truly are is so critically important because, environmental scans happen. Traffic studies happen. All of these various things that folks are saying, we can't do this because of X, actually have already been remediated.
Be more open-minded.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
All right, we want to take a comment we received from social media on Facebook. Jen wrote, there are so many old abandoned mills near centralized areas with access to markets, bus stations, daycare centers, stores, and more. That would be ideal for people that aren't in these buildings, and they can be utilized. Can they be torn down, built up for housing? Cities should offer incentives to builders to develop these buildings. Do you either of you builders think that this is a possibility, getting those mills and putting it into affordable housing?
Sure, yeah, I absolutely do. So, mills and historic structures, one of our builders is actually taking a former church right now in Cumberland and adaptively reusing it into housing. There are so many opportunities to think about abandoned schools, public properties that are sitting and disused, including mills, and making them into housing. I do think it's really important, though, to consider the fact that when you take a mill, if it's historic, you're going to have to apply a fair amount of historic regulations to bring it back, adaptively reuse it into housing, and still be mindful of its historic nature. Similarly, oftentimes these mills were using, jewelry plating and other chemicals in their industry, and it's now it's a brownfield, and you have to do environmental remediation. So I think it's important that when we talk about bringing back mills or churches or other things into housing, that we take off those extra costs, the environmental remediation costs, the historic preservation costs, because those really aren't housing, and it artificially inflates the cost of housing, and I don't think it does a service to the arguments that we're making.
Yeah, does it stop builders from want to even stepping into it?
It does. It does keep us, and just to dovetail with that, there are mills that could easily fit that category. But the one thing that people need to understand is one of the biggest upfront costs is the soil remediation. To take out the PCBs, the VOCs, the old bunker fuel that they had in the tanks that ran the heating plants, or if they ran on coal as fly ash in the soil, that's a massive, massive multi-million-dollar upfront cost, and that takes time. Because a lot of times you can't get end financing for these mills until that's cleaned up first. So we need a pot of money to deal with the brownfield situation that really needs to be dealt with by the legislature and the officials.
All right, well, we've got much more coming up. We're just getting started in our 12 News Housing Crisis Town Hall. After the break, we'll tackle the issue of rent control and why the state's housing secretary says this idea concerns him. Stay with us. Welcome back to our special Housing Crisis Town Hall. One subject we got tons of questions about is rent control. Target 12 investigator Tim White recently raised the issue with the state Secretary of Housing, Stephen Pryor. Here's part of that conversation.
There have been calls by elected officials to consider rent control measures, particularly in Providence, even if temporarily. Should rent control be considered?
Every idea should be considered. That wouldn't be my first resort. And the reason is that I think we need to stay focused like a laser on producing more housing stock. The problem is that we have inadequate supply. Our production rate is the worst in the continental United States. We've got to improve that. We shouldn't try to put mere Band-Aids on it. We need to work on the fundamental problem, and soon. And soon. We need to do radical surgery. We need to do heavy-duty work to improve our conditions. Now, I understand the reasons why folks lean towards other solutions like rent control, but I think we've got to get at the fundamental problem. to preserve and secure the future of our state.
What worries you about rent control? What gives you, help people understand what gives you pause about it?
The problem is that the conditions in which Rhode Islanders will live may end up being much worse because of the fact that landlords underinvest in their properties as a result of the artificial suppression of rents. So there's been a lot that's been studied around this, and there seems to be a lot of evidence that that's what happens. We've got to increase supply.
So increasing supply, obviously what we've all been talking about. Anybody want to weigh in on the issue of rent control?
I mean,
You go first.
So One Neighborhood Builders is a developer, but also a landlord. We have almost 500 units of affordable housing across the state of Rhode Island. We understand how difficult it is for residents who are extremely low income to make ends meet. The fact of the matter is, to keep the lights on, to pay the insurance, which is skyrocketing, to cover maintenance costs, we have to pay. With the rent that we have to charge, just to cover those costs is about $800 a month. We understand that lots of residents, if they're on a fixed income, if you're elderly and you're on Social Security, you're not going to really be able to afford that. And so the state needs rental subsidies to cover the gap between what someone with a fixed income or on a disability can afford to pay in rent and what it costs for landlords, nonprofit and for-profit, need to charge in order to just keep the lights on. I don't think that rent control is the right answer. I strongly agree with Secretary Pryor that we just need to produce more. It's just a fact of supply and demand, and when we have more supply, we're able to control costs.
Well, Jennifer, as we mentioned, we got a lot of viewer questions about this. Let's take one right now. What is Rhode Island's plan to address the extremely large wait list for people applying for rental assistance and subsidized housing options? Have any of you heard anything about a plan to address this and get people the help they need and who are on a wait list? We'd like to take that one.
We're all gonna sound like broken records again. Sorry, I'll take this one, team.
Go for it.
Bottom line is, it's a supply problem.
Yeah.
They're not there.
Right.
The apartments just are not there. And we understand, all of us sitting here understand the need for housing in Rhode Island, whether it's for market rate, whether it's low-income housing, subsidized housing, or it's ownership. We all understand that. The units just aren't there. That's the biggest problem. If you don't solve, and I couldn't agree with the Secretary more, if you don't solve the supply problem, you're spinning your wheels.
Yeah, you can't get someone off a wait list if there's nowhere to put them.
There's no way to put them. You have to kick somebody out to put them in there.
And I really, I applaud the governor and Speaker Shekarchi for making this a priority. This has been decades in the making. This is not something that just happened overnight. And I appreciate all the attention that the housing crisis is getting. But really, it's been so many years in the making. And we're not going to be able to sort of dig our way out of this in the next couple of years. It will take consistent, steady investment in housing production dollars in order for us to close the gap. I think there was coverage earlier in the week that we have a deficit of over 1,000 units every year, just to maintain status quo, not even to address the affordability crisis that we're having. So we need the steady production dollars every year in order to dig us out.
And I just add one caution to what Jen just said. I have to give the credit to the Speaker and the Governor for bringing this attention, especially with the Speaker getting another round of improvements in the legislature that he's going to try to do this year as well. That's going to take time. These laws just took effect on the books in January of this year. So before the developers can start working these new laws through the process, you're probably looking at a year or so before you'll see the first fruits of this. So everybody just needs to, we understand the problem, and we thank the Speaker and the Governor for making this an issue, but it's going to take a little while. It didn't happen overnight. Right. It's not going to happen overnight to fix it either.
People in that position, obviously, they
don't want to hear that.
They wanted to move faster.
Absolutely.
Right.
All right, coming up after the break, we continue taking your questions on a variety of topics, including in-law apartments, what you need to know after the break. Welcome back to our special housing crisis town hall. Another subject that got a lot of questions was in-law apartments. Ariel wrote that with the Ocean State's look at the advocate for additional dwelling units as one of the many solutions to the housing crisis. Chris, we're going to talk to you about this because you're selling houses. People are looking for in-law apartments to get their parents maybe in or family members.
Yeah, everybody's getting creative, right? And I love all the things we've been talking about today. It's a multi-tiered situation with tons of options and things we need to explore. So in-laws, it's now ADUs. It's got a different name now, but it's an in-law, or it's a smaller home that's attached. We're trying to get creative. We have an aging population that has nowhere to go. They either are waiting for assisted living, or they're waiting for perhaps try to get into that $500,000 55 plus condo.
Right.
There's nothing in between. So these ADUs or in-laws, if we can make these more prevalent, then they can move in with their daughter, their son, help with the daycare, because times are tight sometimes right now. And then their cape that they were living in Apponaug, now comes on the market for somebody to have the American dream with. So I know there's a lot of details, there's a lot of moving parts. There's no magic wand, rent control this or that. We can't just wave a magic wand, but we're on the right path with having these conversations. And for all the viewers listening right now and watching this, please have these conversations with your town. They're in the city. They have to happen at a local level.
I want to go back because I know we talked about how this didn't happen overnight. It's going to take a while to fix it. But for the people out there who are on these wait lists, who are struggling, who don't know who to turn to, Courtney, what are the resources available right now for them?
There was a ton of resources that actually sunsetted about August 31st, and we saw this huge uptick of folks calling, going, what happened to rental assistance? What happened to landlord support? What happened to all these? They're not all there, but there are some. And so you can call 211 and we can point you in the right direction. If you are threatened for eviction, there are eviction prevention programs. There are legal assistance programs. There's a number of different resources that can be helpful to you. But also we have utility assistance, food, other resources, because oftentimes when folks are calling saying that they're being threatened eviction, oftentimes we know that there are other things that we can do to offset so that they can pay their rent. And so call 211 and we'll point you. If it's not us, it can definitely be somebody else. But knowing this situation is dire, we will try to do our best and provide as much as we can, but it is a long-term issue. And we're trying to help with as many short-term solutions as possible.
Well, thank you, Courtney, and we want to thank all of our guests for joining us tonight. Obviously, this is something that is affecting so many Rhode Islanders. It's something that is multi-tiered and very complicated, and an issue that we need to keep talking about.
And our in-depth coverage continues online right now on WPRI.com. You can see all of our Housing Week stories, plus interactive maps showing the median price of single-family homes in every community in the state of Rhode Island, and a look at how many building permits have been issued in each city and town this year. Thank you for joining us.